So this is the second video that I'm doing on walking bass lines for bass players. What I'm going to do is give you 2 more routines and a bunch of examples, and we're going to make it quick, and I'm going to let you loose to start figuring out how to play these examples and how to come up with as many patterns as you can. If you're just starting out with walking bass lines, I would suggest going back and watching the first video because you're missing out on the beginning steps. If you just jump right into this video, you won't have the context. So go back and watch the first one and then come back to this one. If you've already watched the first one, the routine that I'm going to give you today, to start with, is going to be root, chord, chord, chord. And just like the last video, I'm going to do that over 2-5-1, just so you can get the routine down, and then eventually we'll apply that to all kinds of chord changes and harmonic movements and things like that. So here's the first example. It's going to be root, chord, chord, chord. So by chord, I mean chord tone. And you can use any of the chord tones from the chord that you're on. You can use the root, third, 5, or 7. And you can play a unique new chord tone every beat if you want. You can also repeat notes. Or maybe, or. So there's a lot you can do with it. Just for these examples, I'm going to give you a handful of them. But like I said, there's a ton of combinations. And what you really want to do is, because there's so many combinations, is you just want to spend time focusing on one of these routines, coming up with as many combinations as you can just to get from one chord to the next, because you can already see how many there are. It's just, there's tons of them. So at first you're going to focus on the math, where you really are just trying to figure out the routine. Okay, root, and then 3 chord tones, but I got to make sure I get back to the root. So root, chord, 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 root, chord, 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 root, chord, 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 root. You're going to do it by math at first, but there's so many combinations that after a while, it's impossible. It's impossible to try to memorize all this and to math your way through this. So the whole point of this series and these routines is really just ear training. It's all about getting your ears used to hearing how to get from one point to another, from one chord to another, and how to connect chord tones. That's the important part. How to connect chord tones, how to do it in a melodic way, and how to connect chords in a melodic way by ear. That's the key to all this. But what we're just doing right now is breaking it down step by step, real slow, so that you can get used to what these routines sound like. And then eventually you'll just be getting from point A to point B any way you want, improvised by ear. So right now I'm going to get into the first routine of today, which is root, chord, chord, chord. And like I said, you can break these up. You can hang on, you can unique chord tones on every beat, hanging on a chord tone for a couple of beats, any combination you want. So that's why I'm suggesting that you spend some time and come up with as many combinations just within this one routine, just getting from D minor 7 to G. Then same thing from G7 to C major, and then getting all 3 connected. So let's start with the first one, root, chord, chord, chord. I'm going to do this routine. Okay, one more time, I'll do it slow. So what I did was the root of D minor, down to the 3rd of D minor. Sorry, try that again. Root of D minor, down to the 3rd of D minor, up to the 5th A. So D, F, A, C, the 7th of D minor, down to the root now of G7. So D, F, A, C, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, C. So G, B, D, F, C. So now the whole thing sounds like And there's our 251, just using root, chord, chord, chord. Now we're starting to sound like we're getting into some walking bass lines. Like we're already miles away from root, 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 root. So you can see how much that you can get out of just a couple of these little routines. Here's a couple more examples. So here's one more example of root, chord, chord, chord. So one more time slowly. So what I did is I used the root of D minor, down to the 7th, down to the 3rd, up to the 5th, down to G, the root, down to its 7th, F, up to its 5th, D, down to the 3rd, B, to C. So real slow. So one more time. So here's one more example. And what I want you to do is use these examples, but use them as a template so that you can come up with your own examples. You're going to want to come up with as many as you can until you can't come up with any more. And then just get used to running them through these changes. So here's the last example I'm going to do. Root, chord, chord approach. Or I'm sorry, root, chord, chord, chord. So one more time. So I did root, 5th, to the root, down to the 3rd, F, to G, the root, up to the 3rd, B, D, back down to the 3rd, to approach the root. Slow, one time. Root. So in time. Now if I wanted to continue, I would do like something like that. This routine is going to be root, chord, chord approach. So the same rules go for the root, chord, 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 except now we're going to be adding a approach note into the next root. As I mentioned before, that approach note can be diatonic from above, diatonic from below, chromatic from above, or chromatic from below. And this is going to open up a lot more possibilities. So as you can see, I can really only give you a handful of examples. You're really going to have to spend time exploring this and investigating on your own because there's just way too many possibilities, which is awesome. It makes it super interesting and it gives you a lot of freedom. But you want to do it slow and you want to do it steady and you want to make sure you get it under control first. Play as many examples as you possibly can. Just exhaust them. And in the process of doing that, you're training your ear to really hear what these various separate approaches sound like so that you can incorporate them. It's almost like blues licks or something like that, where you're just learning a lick, but the whole solo later on isn't about just adding up memorized licks. Hopefully, what it teaches you is how to speak the language. So what I'm going to get into is this last one, root, chord, chord approach. And here's the first example. So what I did was the root of the D, down to the 3rd, up to the 5th, approaching G by half step from above. A goes to A flat, then goes down to G, up to the 3rd, up to the 5th, back down to the 3rd to approach the C from below by half step, and then C. So one more time. So here's the second example of root chord chord approach. One more time. So what I did here is the root of D minor, down to the 7th, down to the 3rd, up to A flat to approach the G chromatically by half step, up to the 3rd, which is B, up to the 5th, which is D, descend chromatically, connect to C. So one more time slow. Root, 7th, 3rd, approach, root, 3rd, 5th, approach, root. Here's the third and last example that I'm going to do for this. One more time. So this one is a kind of a variation on the last one. The root, down to the 5th, A, up to the root, down to F sharp to approach G, chromatically from below, G, 3rd, B, 5th, D, descend, so one more time. And so when you get faster, you want to make it swing too. You don't want to just make it square. That's very stiff. So, focus on your groove and focus on your rhythm too. Don't just necessarily mathematically. We don't want to, it's not a polka. We're not doing a polka thing. So, get the routine down, get it over the changes, but don't forget to make it swing too. That's super important. And then I'll have a couple of more routines for you in the next one.